All right, so we're back. We're Game 2015 in the winter 2019 semester at George Brown, week 10, part 2 of our broadcast around intro to animation with Blender. We just left off. We had our animation window kind of crazy like this, and we did some basic locomotion, moving our object and capturing keyframes and modifying the keyframes a little bit in our animation layout. But for now, I really don't care about this. This is just a demo. I want to get rid of it, so I'm going to go File, New, and come up with this again. So sometimes what I want to do is I don't just want to do an animation. I want to record. Sorry, I don't want to go do a locomotion. I want to do a bit of an animation. And we start off with the idea of deformations. How do animations really work, right? So a lot of times what we have with 3D animation is we have a set of an armature, right, which contains bones, and then an object that we're going to deform. Now, one thing to note, in order for our deformations to work properly, what we're doing is the bone that we're going to see in a second is going to influence different vertices. How many vertices and edges and faces do we have right now? Very few. We have 6 faces, we have 8 vertices, and we have 12 edges. Not a lot of geometry. In order for us to have more success in modifying this so that it looks more organic, right, we need more. So I'm going to subdivide this thing a little bit. So I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode, and I'm going to go into my subdivide window and subdivide it about 6 times or so. Okay, something like this. Okay, not bad. It's not a terribly good amount of vertices or polygons, but we only have 294 faces and about 296 verts, right? Which is pretty cool. Our poly count's fairly low. All right, and this is good. This is a good starting place. So I'm going to press Tab to go back into object mode. And now, so this is the first step. First step is we subdivide, right? In an organic model, and we're not going to go there this week. We're going to start with animations this week. And next week, we're going to talk about more of how to do your own custom organic models and how to do some modeling. But today is more like concepts. So I want to go into front view and in orthographic mode for now. And I want to pull this up 1 unit so that it sits on the ground. Okay, so I'm going to press, I want to move, that's the G key, across the Z axis, as an example, the Z axis, 1 unit, and then press Enter. And then you can see now that it's just sitting on the ground, sitting on this grid, right? Great. So now that I've got this makes it easier for our demo. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. What I want to do is I want to attach a bone. Now, look, in order for this to work properly, guys, you need to have your cursor in the center of your world, and to get there, you're going to press Shift S, cursor to center. If your cursor, your 3D cursor, is not in the middle, please do that first. Next, what I want to do is I want to add a bone. Okay, so the way to do this is if I press Shift A inside of object mode, it takes me to Armature. And I'm going to, right now I haven't enabled certain things, so all I see is a single bone. Please add a single bone. And you can't see it. And the reason why you can't see it is because if you look at your armature settings, so on the top here on the tabs, you see this little body. It looks like a human being, right? A human body. It looks like this. This is the armature tag. I just Shift A, and I went to armature single bone, like this, okay? All right, so here's my armature. It's there, and I'm clicking on here. And what I want is I want to click on X-ray. And if you click X-ray, you can see that the bone kind of looks like this. It's like this octahedral kind of shape, like this. Are you with me?
Oh, where's X-ray?
Here, if you click on the actual tab here in the middle, where the armature is, and if you click on X-ray, so tab here and then X-ray, you'll turn that on. All right, so what X-ray does is no matter where you're looking at the object, you can see the other object inside of it, which is very useful for us. Okay, cool. So I've got this bone, and this is okay. And what the bone does is I want this bone to influence, when I move this bone, I want it to influence my cube. However, in order for me to do such a thing, I want to parent it. I want to parent the cube, create a parent-child relationship between the cube and the armature. And the armature, my friends, always has to be the parent. The cube and the meshes are the children of the armature. So in order for me to do that, I want to right-click on my cube first, and then shift right-click on my bone, right? And then I'm going to press Control P, and Control P is going to give you this object. There's a couple of options. One is Object. The other one is Object, Keep Transform. The third one is Armature, Deform. And then there's with empty groups, with envelope weights, and with automatic weights. I want to choose this option with automatic weights. And if you do that, it does a lot of work for you in the background. In fact, if you look at the wrench now, right? So if I right-click on the object and I look at the wrench, which is the modifier tab, you can see that a armature modifier has been added to the model, right? And again, I'm right-clicking on the model, clicking on the wrench, and then armature modifier. Great. So what does this do? The single bone. If I go back to the single bone, right? If I click Tab to edit, each bone has 3 pieces to it. There's the bottom of the bone, this part right here. There's the top of the bone, this part right here. There's the actual bone itself, the bone body, which is this part right here in the middle, right? And depending on which one you're clicking, you have control over what the bone does. So right now, I only have a single bone. If I want to move the bone, and this is where it gets funky, I can go into something called pose mode. So when I have a bone attached, an armature attached to a, or shape attached to an armature, I have pose mode. And what I can do here is if I right-click on the bone, and if I rotate it, you're going to see that the whole object rotates. It doesn't do much right now. And the same thing goes with if I do something else, like I move the bone, the body, the actual object up and down. The object will follow the bone, just like if it was parented to another object, not the bone. Okay? Yes? But this isn't any fun. Come on, guys. I want to add multiple bones. That's where the fun comes. So I want to, again, I want to undo the armature pairing with the bone. So Control Z a bunch of times, Control Z, until I get to this, where the cube is again separate from the armature. Okay, so I have controls. I've kind of backed out a bunch of times. And I want to, this time, before I do my pairing, I want to go to the bone, which is the armature, right? I want to press Tab to go into edit mode. I want to click on the top part of the bone. Take a look, right? And there's a couple ways you can add new bones. I can add Shift A like normal, or I can use E to extrude. If I use E to extrude, it does this. I just press the top, and E to extrude, I can make another bone, and it's connected to this bone. And if I want it to be exactly up and down, I can constrain it across the Z-axis by pressing the Z key. So you can see that the Z-axis will constrain me. I want to put it just above the shape like this. And there you have it. You have 2 bones. You have bone number 1 and bone number 2. But actually what they're called is, they are called bone and bone 001, right? This is okay, but sometimes what we want to do is we want to call this one the root bone sometimes. So if you look at this bone right here, the bottom bone, we want to call it the root bone, right? Double-clicking in the inspector allows us to change the names of the bones. You can also go to the actual bone tab itself and do that as well. If you click on the right-click on the bone and go to the bone tab, you can change the name up here. All right, so notice that this bone does not have a parent, but if I right-click on this bone now, the one that I extruded, its parent is the root bone, and it shows that in the hierarchy, right? And this is important because we have this parent-child relationship. All right, good. Now I'm going to tab back out into object mode now that I have 2 bones, and I'm going to do the same trick I did last time. I'm going to right-click on my cube and then shift right-click on my armature, and then Control P. Control P will give me a chance to add the bones back in with automatic weights. We're going to talk about what this means in a bit. Good. And we've got our armature, and it looks like our cube, if you open this up, our cube is a child of the armature now. That's how it should look, right? Cube, child of the armature. Okay, so what can we do now? Well, because we've got 2 bones, we can do the following. If I right-click on the bones and I press Tab to go into edit mode, and if I actually move it from edit mode down here into pose mode, and if I rotate across the Y-axis, you can see now that I'm deforming my object by moving the bone. Now, this is not a great deform, but we'll talk about what we can do to fix it. Are you with me? So what this does is it allows me to deform the object. I'm doing it in orthographic view. To see it better, I'll put it into perspective. So then you can see this. You can see that I can deform my object. You can see actually the faces of my object. That's why I subdivided it in the beginning. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this kind of deformation. It would be a little bit simpler than this. All right, let's clear the deformations for a second. And what I want to do here is I want to record these deformations. Well, this is great. What you can do on the timeline, and one question that came to me earlier was, well, I have two bones. Is there only one timeline? Does like everything get the same keyframes? And the answer is no. Every object has their own keyframes for each time frame. Each timeline, on the timeline, each frame, an object can have its own keyframes, right, for each frame. So that means that if I want the object to move around, I'm going to use the bottom root bone. If I want it to have locomotion. So again, let's add here I have 250 frames, too many. Let's go down to 60 again. Here's 60 frames. I'm just going to zoom in here. And all I did was just change this number down here, this number from 60, right? And this is this part right here. I can go right down here. And you can see that in these keyframes, I have keyframe number 5, 10, 15, and so on. I want to move this around again, so let's do that. So I want to kind of move from this position over here, but first I need to capture the default position or the base position. So I'm going to press I for location, rotation, and scale. And then it captures the base position of this bone, the bottom bone, right? Now, if I move this to something like 10, and I move the object around from the bottom bone, I'm not moving the object, I'm moving the bottom bone, right? The object will follow because the object is a child of the bone, right? So if I move this over here, as an example, I move it over, and if I do another capture, right, then I've got a second keyframe, and I've got the object moving around just like before. So it's from here to there. Yay, it's so exciting. And then let's do the next one. Let's go to 20, and I want to move this up again just to give it a little bit more thing. And I want to press basically, I want to also scale it in, right? Notice that the bone scaled everything, right? So be careful when you do this, but we'll talk about the challenge of this later on. Then I want to kind of capture this. So I've got this. It kind of scales in, right, like this. And then I want to move it maybe to a number 30 over here across this way. And I want to scale back out. So I want to kind of scale back to 1, right? And I want to capture that. So that's good. Okay, and that's enough. That's enough. Let's not go too much into this. We've done this already. So again, we're going here, and we can move it up, and we can scale it in and scale it back out. And all that's fine and good. This is like at frame 30. Let's cut these down. Let's cut the whole timeline down to frame 30 so we don't have more than 30 frames. There we go. So it's 3. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 keyframes. But we want deformations. Let's go back to the first frame, and we'll zoom in here. And let's click the other bone, right? If you click the other bone now, it doesn't have any keyframes at all, right? Well, so let's add one in. So we'll add from a basic keyframe perspective. We'll add this. So add a keyframe. And then if I move this over, now the whole object moves, but if you notice, the object hasn't been deformed. But let's deform it here. And let's deform it rationally, like crazy. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to say R, rotate across the x-axis. We'll rotate this like a lot, extreme. So it's kind of one of these, right? And then capture that. I want to use the shortcut key and location, rotation, and scale. And then you can see that as it moves, it's also deforming. See that? It's also deforming at the same time. And now it's deforming weird because as it moves, it also kind of jumps up like this, like whoop, whoop, whoop. And the reason why that's happening is because of the weight paints we're going to go over in a bit. See that? Yeah, not great. It's not the greatest piece of animation. But as you can see, what happens is it does this, open, and then it'll keep on repeating, but it'll go back to the basic shape when it repeats, of course, right? So basic stuff. Let's just do one more thing. We'll make another one, and we'll do it. We won't do it at 20. We'll do it at 25, some other kind of key. So you can see that it doesn't have to be coordinated with the other one. It doesn't even have to be synchronized. Let's do it at 25. So 25, it goes back to normal. So we reset the transformations back, right? Now, in order for you to do this, if I want to reset my transformations, right? So I want to clear post transformations. I can do that here and then capture it, right? And again, notice that I move from here. Oops. I've got some post transformations. Then when I move back to this, you can see that it moves back to normal again, right? All right, and that's my animation now. So my animation is really simple. It does whatever it rolls around, and then it moves back to position, and it keeps doing that over and over again. Yay, but this, I've shown you both deformation and locomotion. Now the deformation, when there's enough deformations on an object, it can appear like there's animations, all right? Because what am I doing when I move my arm anyway? I have my skin in real life. My skin sits on my bones, right? That's the idea of the whole bone analogy, right? And as I move my bones and my muscles, my skin so too stretches and creases and all this kind of stuff. It deforms. My skin sac that surrounds my entire body, if you think about it, right? It deforms according to the position of my bones. And so too does this armature, and it affects the model, right? One of the things about the models and the armature we have to know about really, really quickly is the fact that it has something called weight paints, right? So if you let's just back up here and undo all these things. So I want to kind of undo, get rid of all these these transformations and whatever. But we want to keep this the weight paints. Okay, so one more. There you go. Okay, so we have our object. We have two bones. It's the cube is a child of the armature, and so on. I'm going to look at it from the front now. But then I want to look at something called weight paints. And if I right-click on my cube, and if I press Tab to go into edit mode, there's another option, which is weight paint mode. And then we have these different colors. Yep. I want to show them how to do it too, right? So if you notice that in the top, you have this blue area, and on the bottom, you have this reddish area. Well, the more blue you are, blue indicates 0 influence, the dark blue, this one. And red indicates 100% influence, which means if you notice the bone that's highlighted here is the bottom bone. So for the bottom bone, it has the most influence over the bottom, and it has very little influence over the top, especially where this bone is right here. This is automatic weight paints, but this may not do for you. Maybe you want to make the whole part of the top. You don't want to influence the top and the bottom at all, right? If that's the case, you can repaint this top part. And again, the way to do that is if you look on the left, there is a type of brush you can use. I want to use something called a subtract brush, right? And again, I'm looking at this in orthographic mode. But what I can do is if I paint, I can literally subtract the colors off of my model, right, by painting just like this. So kind of very simple. This is weight. That's why it's called weight paints, right? Because I'm painting each vertice, if you will, a different value. I'm changing the values of the vertices from some value greater than 0, right, which is why this thing wasn't exactly blue, to exactly 0. So the top part of this cube now will have 0 influence from this bottom bone, 0, because there's none. It's completely blue. And if I want to increase the bottom part of this cube to have 100% influence, I can do that too. It'll look weird, and you'll see why in a second. But let's say I want to have this part have 100% influence, right? The bottom bone have 100% influence over this part. I can paint it exactly how I want it, right? I've just changed the brush to add instead of subtract, and I can just paint this the way I want. I can also make my brush size bigger, which is probably what I want, and the strength, which is very important as well. If I turn the strength to 100, then it just becomes, instantly red. Okay, so there we go. So we have some influence. And notice there's some other areas here that are also other colors. I can also go into mix. I can mix. And what I can do here is I can subtract some of this area here, and so I can make whatever color I want. Now, if I went to this is for the bottom bone only. If I go back out and I go right-click on the bone itself and then tab in to edit mode. So I've tabbed into edit mode, then click this cube, and tab into weight paint mode, you can see that the top bone is now selected. Just saying.
You can just pick the bone in mode.
Yep, it's over here actually under bone. Where is it? Under la 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 la.
No, if you click on the bone and your right click.
There you go. And if you notice on the top, there's this red area. And again, what I want to do is I want to make the bottom area completely blue and the top area completely red. I've got this mix. I want to move to add. On the top, I want to make my strength 100%. And then what I can do is quickly just draw this reddish area on the top, which increases the influence of this top bone on the top area. And yeah, there's some influence there too. Let's just clean that up with a subtract. Just really briefly. Maybe I want to probably do a mix instead of a subtract there. And then I want to subtract all this though. So this definitely is all blue, because what's going to happen is, that was bad. Because what's going to happen is that they will have some influence on the top. The top won't have influence on the bottom, and we don't want that. Let's put this back to mix, and let's put that a little bit so that it fades in. Some influence on the bottom there, where there's a bit of green. Now, it really depends on what you want, right? If you want no influence, you can really delineate an area that you can say that this one has no influence, this one has some influence, and there's also a numeric way of doing this as well. All right, so cool. We've got these weight paints and everything else. Let's go back to the armature, and I want to go back to object mode. I want to click on this armature here, and I want to go into pose mode like I have here. And now let's see the difference in effect. So if I go back into perspective, and if I rotate this across the x-axis, you can see that now the bottom doesn't kind of turn up because there's no influence of the top bone, right? There's no influence. I can modify the top, no problem, but the bottom stays flat because there's no influence on it at all. And the same thing goes to the bottom. If I take the bottom, here's another thing that happens. Notice if I move the bottom around, not that it'll make a difference, but I can't influence the top from the bottom. If I rotate the whole bottom, it's the root bone, so everything kind of rotates, right? So I really didn't have to modify the top, the influence of the bottom bone to the top. It's the top bone to the bottom which really matters the most. But notice how it's bent, and so too is this whole armature. And my friends, this is the basis of how animations work. I mean, I've really scratched the surface here. We can go into a lot more detail about weight painting in terms of vertex weight paints and so on. I'm not going to do that here, but the idea is each vertex is influenced by the position of the bone in three-dimensional space. The position, the rotation, and the scale. If I rotate this bone like this inside of the armature, like literally rotate it across this 6 degrees of freedom, whatever I want to do, like rotate it, you know, kind of thing, then what's going to happen is the entire object will rotate. So a good example is this: if I go from the top and I want to rotate this bone across the z-axis, so again, click on the top, rotate the bone across the z-axis, you can see that it's going to twist up this object because the object is going to try and follow what the bone is doing. Okay? Questions around this? This is basic weight paints we talked about, and a basic rig idea, how rig works. I'm going to go into more detail about rigging next week because we're going to have our own models that we're going to try and put together. Today, I want you to think about concepts. How does this work, right? Does anyone not understand the concept of how this works? Good. Let's move on. So I'm going to stop recording, and then I'm going to go into the whole organic model stuff now, how to bring in an organic model for Mixamo and all that kind of stuff, which is important, okay? Again, scratching the surface.